An emperor once gave an order to drown his entire harem. This is one of history's most chilling legends, a story whispered for centuries about a ruler who destroyed his own household in a single, monstrous act. By the end of this investigation, you will understand whether this horrific event is a documented tragedy or a terrifying folktale born from the darkest corners of absolute power. We will sift through ancient palace records and psychological profiles to answer two haunting questions: which emperor is accused of this crime, and what could drive a person to such an extreme? What does this persistent tale reveal about our deepest fears of corruption and control? To grasp the true horror of this legend, we must first understand what an imperial harem actually was. Far from the simplistic image of a pleasure palace, the harem was a walled city within a city, a sealed world of astonishing complexity and power. In empires like the Ottoman or the Mughal, it functioned as the private household of the ruler, but also as a critical political engine. Here resided the sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, often the most powerful person in the empire after her son. His wives and concubines, who could bear future heirs, were not merely ornaments. They were players in a high-stakes game of succession, where the mother of the next emperor could elevate her entire family to immense wealth and influence. The harem was staffed by hundreds of servants, eunuchs, and guards, forming a self-contained economy with its own hierarchies, alliances, and deadly rivalries. For an emperor to destroy this institution was not a private act of madness. It would be akin to a modern leader simultaneously dissolving the cabinet, the intelligence agencies, and the central bank in a single, violent purge. The women within were not just lives to be ended. They were witnesses, potential rivals, mothers of possible heirs, and keepers of countless court secrets. To erase them all was to attempt to silence the very heart of the palace itself. This legend never names a faceless tyrant. It points a direct finger at two of history's most infamous rulers. The first and most poetic suspect is Shah Jahan, the Mughal emperor who built the Taj Mahal as a monument to love. How could the architect of such beauty be linked to such brutality? The story whispers that as his son Aurangzeb besieged Agra to seize the throne, Shah Jahan ordered his entire harem drowned in the Yamuna River. The motive varies. Some say it was to save them from the dishonor of capture. A darker version claims he did it to protect the secret design of the Taj Mahal, ensuring no rival could ever replicate its glory. It is a compelling, tragic narrative, the patron of perfect love also capable of perfect cruelty. Yet historians find no trace of this event in the meticulous court chronicles of the time, the Pajanama. While Shah Jahan was certainly deposed and imprisoned, the records detail political maneuvering, not mass murder. His harem, including his daughters, are accounted for in the aftermath. The drowning of his women appears to be a later, Gothic embellishment, a dark shadow cast by later storytellers onto the marble brilliance of his legacy. The second and far more plausible suspect is the Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim I, known to history as Ibrahim the Mad. His reign was a 7-year parade of terrifying caprice. He was obsessed with furs, lining his palace with sable and drowning concubines he suspected of disloyalty in the Bosporus, only to mourn them extravagantly afterward. He once had his entire harem, 280 women, tied in weighted sacks and thrown into the sea as punishment for one concubine's infidelity. This account comes from the historian Mustafa Naima, writing just decades later. So here, the core of our legend finds a documented home. Ibrahim did not drown every woman in his household in a single act, but he repeatedly used drowning as a method of execution on a horrifying scale. The story of the emperor who drowned his entire harem seems to be a compression, a merging of his many documented atrocities into one unforgettable, symbolic crime. It is less a specific historical report and more a terrifying summary of his reign. So in our detective case, we have a verdict. Shah Jahan is likely innocent of this particular charge, a victim of dramatic rumor. But Ibrahim the Mad stands guilty of the spirit of the crime, a man for whom such an act was entirely within the realm of possibility. The legend, it seems, attached itself to the most monstrous personality it could find. But this raises a profound and unsettling question. If the story about Ibrahim is documented, however gruesomely, why does the more extreme version of the tale, the single total drowning, persist so powerfully? To answer that, we must become historians ourselves, sifting through layers of evidence and understanding how history itself is written. Our investigation starts with primary sources, the documents created at the time by people who were there. For the Ottoman court, we have chronicles like those of Nema, written under the patronage of the state. These are not neutral news reports, they are political documents, often justifying the present dynasty by condemning the past. The detailed accounts of Ibrahim's cruelty serve a purpose. They paint his successor as a restorer of order, a savior from madness, so the record of his drownings exists, but it exists within a frame designed to make a specific point. For Shah Jahan, the silence of the Mughal court chronicles is deafening. The Paranoia is a lavish, illustrated record meant to glorify the emperor. It would never record such a catastrophic, shameful event, but its silence is not proof the event didn't happen. It only proves the court did not wish to record it. This is the historian's first great challenge. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the people in charge of the evidence have every reason to make something disappear. So we look elsewhere to the accounts of foreign diplomats, merchants, and travelers. These European visitors to the Ottoman and Mughal courts were fascinated by the secrecy of the harem, and their letters home are filled with sensational stories. This is where historical gossip enters the record. A rumor heard in a marketplace in Constantinople could be written down as fact in a Venetian ambassador's report, then reprinted and exaggerated in popular travel books back in London or Paris. The distant, exotic emperor became a canvas for European fears and fantasies about absolute power. A story of a ruler drowning his harem confirmed their deepest biases about Oriental despotism. It was a tale that felt true, so it was repeated and amplified until it detached from any single event and became a free-floating legend, ready to attach itself to any infamous name. There's another possibility, a metaphorical one. Could drowning the harem be a poetic turn of phrase that later generations took literally? An emperor who bankrupts his treasury through lavish spending on his household could be said to have drowned his court in debt. A political coup that results in the removal and exile of all his supporters and family could be described as cleansing the palace. Over decades, as the original context fades, a vivid metaphor can harden into a reported event. Or perhaps the legend is a conflation, a compression of many smaller tragedies into one unforgettable catastrophe. History is full of palace purges, of factions being executed or exiled. The story of the single monstrous act is cleaner, more dramatic, and far more haunting than the messy reality of scattered, smaller cruelties. It becomes a symbol, a shorthand for the ultimate abuse of power. And that is the core of the legend's enduring power. Proving it happened exactly as told is nearly impossible. Proving it couldn't have happened is equally difficult. It lives in the shadowy space between documented atrocity and cultural nightmare, a story that feels true because it speaks to a universal fear, the fear that absolute power can erase not just individuals, but an entire world behind palace walls with no one left to tell the tale. The legend's persistence forces us to confront a darker, more universal question than simple historical fact. What kind of mind could even conceive of such an act? The story endures because it feels psychologically plausible, a terrifying endpoint for absolute power left unchecked. At its core lies the archetype of the paranoid tyrant, a ruler so isolated by his own supremacy that every shadow holds a conspirator. The harem, for all its opulence, was the ultimate pressure cooker of loyalty and betrayal. It was a sealed environment where whispers could topple empires, where a favorite concubine could be a spy, and where the mother of a rival prince was a permanent threat. For a mind already tipping into madness like Ibrahim's, this world of whispered alliances and hidden glances could transform into a monstrous hive of treason. Drowning the entire household becomes the ultimate deranged solution. It is not just punishment, it is a desperate attempt to sterilize a world he could no longer understand or control, to achieve a silent, perfect security through absolute erasure. This connects to another powerful motive woven into the tale, one of twisted possession and catastrophic grief. In the version linked to Shah Jahan, the act is framed not as paranoia, but as a perverted extension of love. After the death of his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, the story suggests he was consumed by a jealousy so profound it extended beyond the grave. If he could not have her, then no one else could have anything resembling her. The women of the harem in this reading become mere reflections of a lost ideal, objects that have lost their purpose. Their destruction is the act of a collector who, rather than let his collection be scattered, smashes it entirely. This reveals the horrifying logic of extreme objectification inherent in the system. When human beings are legally defined as property, as possessions of the royal household, the moral step from owning them to disposing of them becomes tragically short. There are not individuals with rights but assets, and in a moment of crisis, whether siege or spiraling insanity, assets can be liquidated. This chilling trope echoes far beyond these palace walls. We see it in the myth of the burning of Moscow, where Russians set their own city ablaze to deny it to Napoleon. We hear it in the grim logic of scorched earth policies throughout history. The idea of destroying what you love most to prevent an enemy from possessing it is a desperate, final act of control. For an emperor, the harem represented his legacy, his pleasure, his private world. To drown it is to make the ultimate statement: if I cannot hold this, then no one will. The legend persists not because we have a verified police report, but because it maps perfectly onto our deepest understandings of corruption, of madness, and of the tragic, violent end of love when it becomes entangled with absolute ownership. It feels true because in the darkest possibilities of human psychology, it absolutely could be. Our investigation has taken us from the gilded cages of imperial palaces to the darkest corners of human ambition. We have walked the silent corridors of the harem, a world of immense political power and profound personal peril. We have stood before two accused emperors, Shah Jahan, the architect of sublime beauty, and Ibrahim the Mad, a man whose documented cruelties defy comprehension. We have sifted through court chronicles and travelers' tales, learning that history is often written in whispers and justifications, not in clear ledgers of fact. And we have peered into the psychology of absolute power, where paranoia and possession can twist into something monstrous. So where does this leave the chilling legend of the drowned harem? A single verified historical account of an emperor ordering that specific total act in one moment remains elusive, lost in the fog between metaphor and atrocity. Yet the legend's stubborn endurance across centuries is its own profound truth. It has survived not as a factual report, but as a powerful cultural metaphor. It embodies the ultimate corruption of unchecked authority, the terrifying fragility of life when you are seen as property, and the silent echoes of the countless stories that palace walls were built to contain. The tale forces us to remember that for every glorious monument and grand empire, there are human costs written in ink that fades and in voices that were deliberately silenced. So what do you think lies at the heart of this mystery? Is there a buried kernel of truth to this tale, a real event that history tried to erase? Or is it the ultimate historical horror story, a fictional nightmare that feels truer than fact because it reveals our deepest fears about power? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and if you want to join more journeys into the shadows of the past, subscribe for more explorations of history's greatest mysteries.